to a story that continues to develop out of Athens, Clarke County. We've been taking you to some live pictures and some video from inside the Clarke County Superior Courthouse, where a cold case murder trial began today. This is the case of the killing of Tara Baker, a 23-year-old University of Georgia law student. She was found dead in 2001, and authorities now believe, they say they know, who committed the crime. They have accused Edrick Faust of committing the murder. Faust has pleaded not guilty. His trial began today. Opening statements started around lunchtime. Currently, court is in recess, but this is what one of the attorneys for the state had to say earlier today.
And so again, with all this investigation going on and no leads being developed, the case goes cold. Something happened that changed all of that in 2023. Something called the Coleman-Baker Act was signed into law by Governor Brian Kemp. In case you hadn't figured out, the Baker part of that act is named after Tara. This is a law designed to address cases exactly like this one, where all leads have been exhausted and no likely perpetrator has been identified. What the law does is it directs new eyes to be placed on the file, to see if all appropriate forensic testing and analysis was done in the first instance, or if additional testing might produce evidence or information relevant to the investigation. And so at this point, enter into our story Agents Liz Bigham and Jeremy Howell with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Agent Bigham, Agent Howell are longtime agents with the GBI, and they joined that cold case unit after the law was enacted. In December of 23, they started looking at this case. And one of the first things they did was a dogged re-examination of all the physical evidence in Tara's case.
So those are comments from the state inside the Clarke County Superior Courthouse in the early hours, not even the early days, the early hours of this murder case in the case of the killing of Tara Baker, that 23-year-old University of Georgia law student. This case started with Tara Baker's death in 2001. Here we are about 25 years later, and this cold case has now heated up. Prosecutors have brought charges. We're going to turn now to Darryl Cohen, who is an attorney in private practice now, but with experience as a prosecutor in Fulton County and elsewhere. Darryl, you've been on lots of 11 Alive shows. I think this is your first time in the streaming center. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And we should point out right off the top, you are not involved in any way in the Tara Baker case.
Only viewing it from afar.
But you have lots of experience as a prosecutor, lots of experience in the courtroom. I wonder if we can start here. I suspect a lot of folks who are following along with this trial, the first question might be, how do you take a case that's 25 years old and generate enough evidence that leads prosecutors to think they have probable cause to charge?
Well, Zach, first of all, a lot of people confuse a cold case with a case that's not solved. It could very well be that this defendant was on the eyes. They had him 20 years ago, 24 years ago, but because of DNA and the incredible amount of DNA, how it's just moved forward forensically, the prosecutors, in this case the DA's office, is able to reach out and say, now we think you were the defendant before, we think you killed her, now we can prove it.
This is, because investigators, they have case files, and all of these cases, they'll have people they have questions about, people they maybe have underlined or circled in their notes, but for one reason or another, you're saying they can't get it over the hill of probable cause at some juncture in the past.
Well, they don't want to make an arrest unless that arrest will likely stick and unless the DA's office can have a viable prosecution, a successful prosecution, or basically a conviction. So rather than taking a flyer, taking the risk of investigating what they did, making a temporary arrest, which is all it would be if there's not enough evidence, they want to wait, and it may be forever. In this case, it felt like forever and then some. Then they made the arrest based upon all of the evidence that they were able to compile, and more than probable cause. Probable cause is enough for an arrest. Did he or she maybe possibly do it? That's all you really need for
Kind of
probable
the
cause.
50% plus one
Yeah,
bar, right?
It's sort of like possible cause, but they believe that they have enough to convict him of her murder.
When you talk about the beyond a reasonable doubt standard, would much higher. Darryl, you talk about DNA evidence, you talk about the forensic evidence in the just 25 years since 2001. How much has that science evolved?
Oh, it's evolved incredibly. If we go back to the missing kids in Atlanta that were murdered, Wayne Williams was convicted. That was the beginning of Georgia's DNA, just a little bit. And as each year goes by, science is able to refine, and refine. And now I can't say it's perfected, because as Yogi Berra once said, it ain't over till it's over. They will continue to get better.
And you talk about the evolution of the science. I would imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but inside of every law enforcement agency, they've got the new cases coming in, landed on an investigator's desk, and then they've got the cold case box that they are trying to continue to revisit. You have these developments in the forensic technology. You perhaps are thinking as an investigator, okay, we may have another shot at this. How do investigators balance keeping up with the old caseload and what is coming in fresh?
That's what I call a DGQ, a darn good question. He or she has to decide, wait a minute, this is forensic evidence that's pointing to the person we believe was a person of interest, now a suspect, and soon to be a defendant. You just don't know. It depends on what case comes up. It's sort of like breaking news. We're planning to have this on air, but something just happened. And so that gets pushed off or pushed away, and we do it now.
I would suspect that would also require a sort of passing of the torch inside of these agencies when one investigator, one detective has been on this case maybe for years, maybe for decades of their career. They leave agencies, they retire, they move on. They, I would suspect, would have to then alert whoever is taking their place and say, hey, remember this case. Keep an eye on it. Keep track of it. How challenging is that, particularly as we've seen in the last recent years, some real turnover and challenges in hiring and retaining law enforcement officers, not just in Georgia, but around the country?
Well, it's not easy. If I am the chief investigator, the chief detective, what happens if I have a stroke? What happens if I die? So hopefully I've made copious notes in the file. Hopefully I've brought in my partners, other investigators, so he or she or they are aware of what we're looking at. It's not easy, but there's sometimes a detective has a case and he or she wants to keep that case as long as they can, because I just absolutely do not like the fact that this person murdered this poor victim, and I'm going to bring him or her, in this case him, to justice.
What kind of challenges, I mean, we're talking about the forensics, we're talking about the DNA, the science behind it, but testimony, first-person testimony is a core element of, I don't want to say every successful prosecution, but most of them, juries like to hear from witnesses. How challenging can it be in a case that is this old, in any case that stretches on for decades, to bring in effective witnesses and first-hand testimony?
What did you have for lunch yesterday? I couldn't tell you. And so you take yesterday and move yesterday to last year, the year before, the decade before. Minds have a funny way of hearing what's going on, and it goes through your mind to your mouth, and it comes out differently. I think it's very challenging. That's why, in this case, DNA will be, in my view, just paramount in being able to prosecute.
We've been talking about the state's perspective on these cases. You're a former prosecutor, that makes sense. But as a former prosecutor and somebody in private practice now, you know the other side as well. How does a defense attorney, how does a defendant prepare for a case like this?
My quick answer is carefully. My other answer is he or she has to be able to turn on a dime. In other words, the testimony that was going to happen here in the courtroom, I have to know that this person was 25 years old 25 years ago, this witness, maybe he or she was 60 and they can barely talk now. they can't see well. What did you, I mentioned earlier, what did you have for lunch yesterday? Well, my memory's just not as good as it once was. You have to be very careful and analyze all of this and completely, absolutely, 1,000% prepare this person, because all of us have good memories and bad memories. It depends on what resonates. So you want to make sure that you that this witness is as good as he or she can possibly be, and it's not going to be perfect. And you let the jury know, either in your direct examination or an opening statement, that some of our witnesses are not going to be as good today as they were 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago. But when you tell the truth, you do not have to remember what you said.
And we should point out, in this case, the defendant has pleaded guilty. Everyone is innocent until proven guilty. We, of course, are going to track this case as it progresses over the next few weeks. We are told it will take several weeks to get to a verdict. Darryl, let me ask you this. There is a finite number of resources to conduct the kind of forensic testing that is required to get the results, the evidence that you have described is so helpful for prosecutors in these kinds of cold cases. How readily available and how rapidly available are those resources, those testing resources, for law enforcement officers here in Georgia? Can they get it done quickly, or is there a backlog?
It depends. That's the magic two words. It depends.
They talked about that. It depends a lot when I was in law school.
Yeah. And so it definitely depends on how much this case is. How much of a high-profile case is this? Is this Joe who was found on the side of the road? Would like to solve it, but okay, I'm sorry. This was a law student, University of Georgia, Clark County. This is a case of major importance for many, many reasons, not the least of which is no one wants to see someone who's doing something with their life, something good, fall by the wayside and not be taken care of. They're looking for justice. You can never get mercy for this poor girl. She's dead, but they're looking for justice.
Darryl, I want to end here. We've talked about the science. We've talked about the prosecution, the defense attorney's likely perspective on all of this. We most certainly do not want to lose sight of the family here. Tara Baker, taken at the age of 23 back in 2001. In your experience dealing with families, the loved ones of somebody who is a victim of a crime, how do they get through this? And how hard is it to have to wait a quarter of a century to even get to a trial?
Day by day, step by step. There is no answer that you can say mathematically, this is the way it is. The way it is each person processes his or her grief in a different way. And I think most families, when someone is finally arrested, is finally prosecuted, and hopefully, at least in their view, convicted, will be absolutely elated. It won't bring back Tara Baker, but it will bring closure. And let me say this, Zach. A lot of this case will depend on our defendant. How is he dressed? What is his body language? How his facial expressions during the trial? Jurors don't just listen with their eyes closed to a witness, whether it's a witness that's a professional forensic scientist or just, and I don't mean just, but a regular person. Juries want to see what's going on. How did he respond? How did he react to this testimony?
Darryl Cohen, we're going to leave it there. We're going to keep a close eye on this case, and I hope we're able to bring it back as we continue to cover it. Your perspective, appreciate it as always. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.